Okay, for the Dhamma talk today, I've actually selected sutta. This is actually from the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is the minor collection of the Sutta Pitaka. And this sutta is actually extracted, from the Sutta Nipata, of the Khuddaka Nikaya. And this is actually sutta number 2.14, and it's actually referred to as the Dhammika Sutta. Okay. And I'm going to be actually focusing in respect of the observance of the sila. As you know, sila means it refers to our virtue, our morality. And I'm going to be focusing on the observance of sila, for the lay people, the lay community, or the laity. So, and I'm going to be actually focusing and to investigate, whether it is possible, for us to be impeccable, in our observance of sila. When I say impeccable means, which means we actually follow and observe our sila very conscientiously, and very assiduously, to make sure that, we do not actually breach any of the sila that has actually been laid down by the Blessed One. So basically, in essence, in a nutshell, our discussion today will center, in terms of the laity's observance of the sila. And as you know, in the practice and cultivation of the spiritual path, the Buddhist spiritual path, which the Blessed One refers to as the Dhamma-Vinaya, the cultivation of the path, for the monastics, of course, we know, it actually comprises sila, samadhi, and panya. Okay, basically, sila is morality, samadhi is actually our concentration, and panya is our wisdom. But for the laity, it's actually dana, sila, bhavana. So, which means dana means we must cultivate charity, generosity. Sila, which is our morality, and bhavana means it's our mental cultivation, our mental development, to make sure that we enhance the states of wholesomeness, and to actually minimize and eradicate the states of unwholesomeness in our minds. So that, in a nutshell, sums up, the path of the spiritual practice that the Blessed One has taught. So if you actually compare, between the two paths, one for the monastic and one for the laity, you see that there's actually a common factor between the two. And what's that common factor? That common denominator is actually sila, and that's actually morality. So from this, we know that sila actually plays an extremely important role, and factor, a pivotal role, in our practice of the Dhamma-Vinaya, or the teachings of the Buddha. Because without this sila, essentially, there's actually no building block for us to proceed further, and that itself, does not allow us to actually proceed any further in our spiritual path. So the very first factor we need to actually be mindful is that we must actually cultivate sila, as the first factor. And if you actually look at the sutta, the Buddha has actually emphasized, time and time again, the importance of sutta in various parts of the Sutta Pitaka, the Pali Canon. I'd like to draw your attention, first of all, to this sutta, which is actually from the Anguttara Nikaya 3.2, the AN 3.2, where the Buddha actually defines what actually constitutes a fool, and what actually constitutes a wise person. The Buddha says that a person who actually misconducts himself by body, speech, and mind, and that person is actually a fool. But on the contrary, a person who's upright in his body, speech, and mind is actually recognized as a wise person. And if we actually reflect upon this, what does the Blessed One actually say that? If you think carefully, a person who misconducts himself by body, speech, and mind, he's actually creating, the unwholesome, heavy, karmic energy that's actually potentially going to pull him down to the woeful planes, which is actually, as you know, either as an afflicted being, spirit, which is a hungry ghost, or as an animal, or in hell. So a person who does it, of course, is definitely a fool. I mean, you have the chance to practice, to cultivate your sila, but you choose not to, and instead you create all the negative energies, negative karmic energy. Then, of course, you're a fool. But if you're wise enough, then you will actually choose to observe your sila, very conscientiously, and because of this, you create the good karmic energy, the light karmic energy that is going to elevate you to higher states of existence, either as a human or in the heavenly celestial realms. So from here, this sutta, the Buddha himself has actually highlighted to us the importance of observing our morality. Next, we look at this sutta called the AN 7.6, where the Buddha actually defines he actually tells us that in this world there are actually 7 treasures. And what are these 7 treasures? The Buddha says. So if you look at the definition, Buddha says that these 7 treasures essentially they comprise of what? First of all, it's actually the saddha, the conviction. Okay, saddha, sila, chaga, panya. So basically, is our conviction. And then of course is our virtue, then followed by generosity and of course wisdom. Then on top of that, you also have the treasure of the shame and fear of doing unwholesome deeds, which is actually what we call the hiri or tapa, And the last one, of course, the 7th treasure is the treasure of listening, which is a treasure of learning the Dhamma. Because if you learn the Dhamma well, then you actually understand and you're able to put that into practice. So the Buddha says that whoever a man or a woman, if he actually possesses these 7 treasures, he's actually said to be someone who has not lived in vain. Means that he has actually lived the life well. It's worth living as a human being if you possess these 7 treasures. And for the treasure of virtue, the Buddha says that this treasure of virtue should be cultivated by the wise, at all times, remembering the Buddha's instructions. So again, here the Blessed One has again emphasized the importance of sila. And again, in this the sutta, in Iti Vittaka number 76, the Buddha again highlights, that if a person should actually wish for 3 things to come to him. Firstly, he actually longs for praise to come to him. And secondly, he wants wealth to come to him. And then at the breakup of the body upon death, he wishes that, that may he reappear in a good destination, in the Sugati, means a happy destination in the heavenly abodes, in the heavenly realms. Then if this person should wish for these three things, then the wise person should guard his virtue, very conscientiously. He must guard it at all times. So again, in this Iti Vittaka, the Buddha has actually emphasized again the importance of observing your sila, your virtue. So now, having known the importance of observing the sila, so exactly what are the guidelines that we should actually follow? What are the guidelines or the code of conduct? As lay people, we should actually follow to make sure that we guard our virtue, and on top, and because of that, our future, in terms of our rebirth, will be more assured. So in this regard, I'd like to refer you to our discussion today, which is extracted from Sutta Nipata, 2.14. And this sutta actually concerns a layperson by the name of Dhammika. And this conversation between Dhammika and the Blessed One actually took place, excuse me, near Savatthi, in Jeta Grove and Anathapindika's monastery. So at one day, this Dhammika with 500 of his lay followers actually went to see the Buddha, and having seen the Buddha, right, then he actually asked the Buddha, how should a disciple of the Buddha, practice virtue? How should virtue be practiced by the noble disciples of the Buddha? And here he's actually asking a two-pronged question. One is actually observing sila by the monastic, means people who have disciples who have gone forth, from home lives to homeless lives, as well as those lay followers who are still householders, who haven't gone forth but still enjoying the sensual pleasures of the homely life. So the Buddha, in response to that, of course, the Buddha actually outlined the guidelines and the code of conduct for the lay people. Of course, the Buddha speaks of the precepts that must be followed. Firstly, is that one should not kill or cause other to kill. Okay. Secondly, he says that the person should not actually take something that does not belong to him, or incite another to steal. And thirdly, the Buddha says that a person should avoid sensual misconduct, okay? Because doing that now is actually like falling into a glowing charcoal. That's what the Buddha says, for the third precept. And the fourth precept, the Buddha says that one should not tell lies, should not actually engage in false speech. And fifth, the Buddha says that a person should not indulge in drinking of intoxicants, because by taking intoxicants, this will actually lead to mental derangement, into madness. So in fact, the Buddha has actually outlined, very clearly that these are the 5 precepts that lay people must observe. At the very minimum, you must observe the 5 precepts. Otherwise, if you do not observe this, then you do not actually qualify to be a human being. The chances are that you actually fall below the status of a human being. Then after explaining the five precepts to Dhammika, right, then the Buddha actually went on to actually tell Dhammika that on top of that, you should actually practice what we call the 8-factor observance, which is actually what we know as the 8 precepts. Okay, so if you look at the 8 precepts, basically, in terms of the 4 precepts under that you see, the first 4, basically they are similar to the 5 precepts, which is to refrain or to abstain from killing, from taking what's not given, to tell a lie, and also to drink intoxicants. But in respect of the 3rd precept, in terms of sexual misconduct, under the 8 precepts, one must instead observe celibacy. Means that one must actually abstain from all sexual acts, and to observe and to be celibate, if you're observing the 8 precepts. And on top of that, the 6th precept is that the Buddha says that you must not eat food or drinks, which are not allowed, at the inappropriate time. And of course, this inappropriate time means any time that's actually after the solar noon, when the sun is actually highest in the sky. So any time after that, one refrains from taking food. And the 7th is that one shall not dance, sing, listen to music, watch entertainment, and one shall not actually wear flower garlands, ornaments, or use perfumes. And the last, the 8th one, is that one shall not use high or large beds. So the Buddha says that these actually constitute the 8-factor observance, or the 8 precepts. And the Buddha says that, after you observe the 8 precepts, and your mind will be very gladdened, because you managed to observe the 8 precepts, and you observe these 8 precepts on special days, and these are called the Uposatha days. These are special days, like the Sabbath days for Buddhists. So after you have observed the 8 precepts, your mind will be gladdened, and you have this joyful mind and with a pure heart. After observing the Uposatha sila, then you should go to monasteries and distribute suitable food and drinks to the bhikkhu sanghas, and on top of that, you should also support your mother and father, as your duty, as a son or daughter. And you should engage in lawful trading, means that you must actually have right livelihood, not do any occupation, that actually breaches the 5 precepts. And the Buddha says a layman who actually observes the 8 precepts and carries out this duty diligently goes to the celestial realm, and he can be reborn as a deva in the self-radiant, deva, or what we call the Abhasara deva. So so from this sutta, you can imagine how wonderful and how remarkable observing the 8 precepts is. In addition to 5 precepts, if you actually resolve yourself to observe the 8 precepts on Uposatha days, you just imagine how wonderful and remarkable the benefits are. The Buddha says that if you do this diligently, then upon death, and you potentially you can actually be reborn in the deva realm called the self-radiant devas, who are actually the Abhasara devas. So if you actually read the Pali Canon again, time and time again, the Buddha actually emphasizes how wonderful it is to observe the 8 precepts. Here I just extracted a few more suttas for you to actually ponder upon. And like one of these is actually from the AN 3.70 called the Roots of the Uposatha, where the Buddha actually says, what is this Uposatha of the noble ones? Actually, the Buddha says that the purpose of us observing the Uposatha or the 8 precepts is such that we can actually purify and cleanse our defiled minds, so that we we are not distracted, by the sensual pleasures, and preoccupied by sensual pleasures, and instead we can actually concentrate our minds, towards the practice of the Dhamma. And we can achieve this practice of the 8 precepts through proper techniques. So the Buddha actually outlined how you should practice the Uposatha. Firstly, you must actually reflect and contemplate on the qualities of the Buddha, the Tathagata. And secondly, you must actually reflect and contemplate on the qualities of the Dhamma. And then thirdly, reflect and contemplate on the Sangha, the bhikkhu Sangha, and how well practiced they are, and how valuable the bhikkhu Sangha is. And fourthly, you must also recollect your own virtues. You must think about, I've actually been observing my sila, very well, very conscientiously and very diligently. And when you reflect upon this, you feel that, you feel a sense of joy and rapture, and happiness within yourself. It just wells up in you, and you also contemplate about the devas, in the different realms of existence. You actually contemplate that, these devas, they themselves, are reborn there because they have done exactly the same thing, as what I've been doing. They have been practicing the same way as what I've been doing, and you actually rejoice and think about the devas. And after having contemplated this, and bring your mind towards recollecting all this, then you observe the 8 precepts, like what I've actually outlined earlier. Okay. So the Buddha in this sutta actually says, such is the Uposatha of the Noble One, and he is actually he's speaking to Visakha, and he says that this observing of the Uposatha sila, the 8 precepts, is of great fruit and great benefit, is of great glory and great radiance. And how is this great? The Buddha actually gives a comparison. He says that just imagine there is this king that actually has got sovereignty, over 16 great lands. These are like, he's actually he's a ruler over these great masses of land, and these lands are abundant and replete with 7 treasures. But the Buddha says the enjoyment of this king doesn't even equal to 1/16th part of this Uposatha. And why does the Buddha say that? Because the Buddha says kingship over human beings is actually miserable, when compared to heavenly bliss. And why does the Buddha say that? Then the Buddha actually went on to say, if you observe your Uposatha sila, and you actually are reborn among the devas of the 4 great kings, what we call the Chatu Maharjika Deva, one day in the heavens of the 4 great kings is actually equivalent to 50 human years. And if you do the math, so the lifespan in these 4 great kings is actually 9 million human years. That's actually quite inconceivable, right? But that's not just that. If you happen to be born in the devas of the 33, the devas of the 33, which is actually the Tavatimsa heaven, one day in the second level, in the second realm of the Tavatimsa, is actually equivalent to 100 years. 100 human years. Only one day and one night is 100 human years. And if you calculate now, the 30 days make a month, and you calculate in a Tavatimsa Deva lifespan is actually 36 million human years, And while you're as a Deva in this realm, you actually enjoy exquisite, and exquisite sensual pleasures, which nobody on human can actually visualize. It's simply exquisite and much more enjoyable than what human beings can enjoy. So that's why the Buddha actually encourages all the devotees to practice, to observe the 8 precepts as much as possible. Be conscientious and be diligent. And the Buddha says that again in these 2 suttas, this AN 8.43 and AN 8.41, the Buddha says those who observe the 8-part Uposatha, they actually they will be reborn to heavenly abodes, and they will reap great and glorious fruit and benefits. You see, in many parts of the sutta, the Buddha keeps on emphasizing for us to observe the 8 precepts. And just to highlight again the importance of the observance of 8 precepts, you find that from this Anguttara Nikaya, books of 10.46, there's actually a conversation between the Blessed One and the Sakyams. the Sakyan lay followers, the Sakyan is basically the Buddha's clan. And there's this conversation between the Blessed One and the Sakyan lay followers. And the Buddha actually asked the Sakyan people, say, do you observe the 8-factor Uposatha? You know, it's a very direct question. The Buddha asked them, do you observe your 8 precepts? Then the Sakyan say, sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. You know, which means that they're not very consistent. Sometimes they feel like it, they do. Sometimes they don't. They don't feel like it. They just don't. You know, or maybe they're not able to. Then the Buddha tells them, he says, it is no gain for you, Sakyans. It is ill-gotten that in this life, there's actually beset by so much of grief and death. They're so uncertain that you are so inconsistent in observing the 8 precepts. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You know, and what the Buddha says is actually very true. You know, our lives are indeed beset with much of uncertainty and grief and death. Right? I mean, just look at the pandemic now. You know, it's so all of a sudden, you know, the whole world, the entire world on a global scale, you know, is actually adversely affected by this pandemic. So the Buddha says it's very uncertain, you know, what will happen to us, you know, and life is actually full of so much of grief and death, and yet you don't observe your Uposatha sila, you know, and that itself is no gain for you, you know, it's ill-gotten. You know? So the Buddha says it's unadvisable. So from here, the Buddha actually again highlights that it's actually very important for us to observe the 8 precepts. So if you look at the Pali Canon, you know, in some suttas, the Buddha actually talks about the 5 precepts, and in some suttas, the Buddha talks about, you know, the importance of the 8 precepts. But when we read suttas, we must actually read suttas as a whole, on a holistic basis. Means you shouldn't just look at one part, you know, of the sutta and form a conclusion. You must actually take, you know, a wide scope, you know, of what the Buddha has actually covered in various parts of the sutta, because Buddha actually delivers his sutta based on the temperament, you know, and the inclination, you know, of the audience. So he tailors his talks very specifically for the audience. So sometimes he may concentrate on just certain topics, you know, on any one day. So for us to get the holistic picture of what the Buddha taught, we must actually read, you know, a wide spectrum of suttas. So in terms of the precepts, other than the 5 and the 8 precepts, the Buddha also talks about the 10 unwholesome actions. And what are these 10 unwholesome actions that the Buddha says that we must refrain from committing? You know, we must abstain from these 10 unwholesome actions. The Buddha says that if one actually has got these 10 qualities, one is actually deposited in hell as if brought there. And what are these 10? If you look at it, let us just investigate this. By this 10 unwholesome actions by body, of course, is referring to killing, taking what is not given, and of course, sexual misconduct. You know, and these are the 3 unwholesome actions by body. And in terms of speech, you know, there's actually 4 unwholesome actions. Firstly, is actually telling falsehood, and secondly, is actually telling speech or speaking speech that is actually malicious and slanderous, you know, and divisive, you know, with the intention to actually create disharmony among parties who are actually at peace and in harmony. The whole intention is to divide people, and that itself is actually a very potent unwholesome action. And thirdly, you know, this person likes to speak harsh language. You know, he likes to speak very harshly and uses vulgar language. And fourthly, he indulges in idle chatter. You know, he likes to gossip. You know, talks about, you know, the affairs of others. You know, and likes to gossip. You know, and talks about things which are not Dhamma related. And these are the 4 unwholesome actions relating to speech. And then of course, there are also the 3 unwholesome actions relating to the mind. Firstly, is actually full of longing, which is what we call covetousness. He actually covets and longs for the wealth and property of others. He looks at others' wealth and he thinks, oh, no, may this one day belong to me. I want to get my hands on this wealth and properties of others. And secondly, he actually has got a mind of ill will. You know, it's not just normal anger or ill will. You know, this type of ill will, you know, is so intense that he actually wishes for misfortune to befall someone. You know, he wants this person to be slaughtered, you know, to be slain, to be cut off, to be annihilated. You know. That is a very potent type of ill will. That's really, really unwholesome. And he actually holds wrong views. You know, he does not believe in in charity. He says that, you know, there's actually no benefit in giving. There's no fruit, you know, in doing wholesome actions. And he believes there's no world, no other world, means that he believes that there's no rebirth. And he believes no father, no mother, means that he does not believe in the benefits and importance of looking after parents. And he also does not believe in spontaneous rebirth, you know, like the case of devas, or maybe, like, for example, hell beings, or, you know, or the hungry ghosts. And also he does not believe that there are actually well-practiced ascetics or Brahmins who actually conduct themselves well, and they've actually realized the truth, you know. So he does not believe in all these whole wrong views. And these are the 10 unwholesome actions the Buddha says that, you know, as lay people or even monastic, we must make sure we don't commit any of these 10. And why does the Buddha say that? You know, if you look at this sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya, MN 41, the Buddha says that if you actually conduct any of these 10, that means 3 unwholesome action by body, 4 by speech, and 3 by mind. And by reason of this, after death, you know, you are creating the potential to reappear in the states of deprivation, in states of unhappy destination, you know, and even in hell. So you can imagine how important it is for us to safeguard ourselves and not to commit any of these 10 unwholesome actions. And again, in this Sutta MN 9, this is actually spoken by Venerable Sariputta. Venerable Sariputta says that for you to have the right view means it's actually the very first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. You must be able to understand what is unwholesome and what is wholesome. You know, that is the very first starting point. Even if you want to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, you must possess the right view. And what is this right view? So the Buddha says that for you to recognize unwholesome action, you must know that these unwholesome actions comprises 10 things, like what I mentioned just now. The 10 unwholesome actions, the 3 by body, 4 by speech, and 3 by mind. So if you understand this, that means you have actually you have entered the right view. It means you have entered into the stream of the Noble Eightfold Path. You know, if you haven't even understood what right view is, then you haven't even stepped your foot yet, you know, into Noble Eightfold Path. You're still outside the path. So that's why it's very important for us to know, you know, what are these 10 unwholesome actions. And again, in this AN 10.176, the Buddha again tells this Chunda. The Chunda is actually somebody who is not a Buddhist, you know, and he actually tells the Buddha, you know, that, for us, we actually purify ourselves by not touching the cow dung or touching the grass, or maybe taking, you know, bath in the river, you know. So he says that these are the ways that we purify ourselves. Then the Buddha says, actually, do you know what is purification in the discipline of the noble ones, the Aryans? Then he says, oh, actually, I don't know. Then the Buddha says, okay, let me tell you. Basically for the purification for the in the Aryan path, basically again the Buddha talks about the 3-4-3. You know, 3 by body, 4 by speech, 3 by mind. You know, and because of this, if you refrain from these 10 unwholesome actions, you're actually practicing skillful actions. Then if you do this, then you are actually you create the potential to be reborn among the devas, and if not, then at the very least, still as a human being, you know, or any other good destination. So again, the Buddha again highlights the importance of these 10 unwholesome actions. So, like I mentioned, these 10 unwholesome actions is actually something that's very important, that's been emphasized by the Buddha over and over again, you know, in the Sutta, in the Pali Canon. So if you commit any of the 10 unwholesome actions, what's going to happen? So in this Sutta, you know, from the AN 8.4, it is actually very revealing, you know. The Buddha actually tells the monks that, for example, you know, if you actually commit taking of life, you know, if you kill, then, you know, then you're creating the potential to be reborn in the hell, or as a common animal, or even as a hungry shape, it means a hungry ghost, you know. But when after your unwholesome karma has been exhausted, and eventually, you know, you emerge as a human being, but when as a human being, you actually have a short lifespan, you know. And for stealing, then of course it's the same thing, you know, you actually create the potential to be reborn in the woeful plains. But when you become a human being, then it leads to the loss of one's wealth. You know, like suddenly, all of a sudden, you lose your wealth for no reason. You know, whether by you know, disasters, or, you know, by cheated by someone. You know, then suddenly, you know, you just lose your wealth for no reason. So it's because of this karma of stealing. And thirdly, you know, if you actually commit sensual misconduct, then of course it's the same thing. You create the potential to be reborn as in the woeful planes. But as a human being, it leads to rivalry and revenge. You're full of enemies wherever you go. And for telling falsehood as a human being, it leads to being falsely accused. It's like for no reason you're just being falsely accused. It's like circumstantial evidence suddenly stacks up against you, and you're just being falsely accused. And then for divisive tale bearing, and you like to slander and like to have malicious speech and and tale bearing and backstab others. Then when this ripens as a human being, you actually find that you actually lose all your friends. You have no friends at all. And if you actually like to speak harshly, it leads to unappealing sound. You find that a lot of people actually speak very harshly to you, in return. You always listen to very unappealing sound, very harsh speech being spoken to you. And if you like to engage in frivolous chatter, to gossip and all this, and then you find that as a human being, you find that it leads to words which are not worth taking to heart. Means you also in turn listen to a lot of this frivolous chattering or all this nonsensical chattering. And if you have the habit of drinking fermented, and distilled liquors which are intoxicants, as a human being, then you become mentally deranged. You become a lunatic and you are mad because of this drinking of intoxicants. So you can see that the Buddha has actually outlined why it's important for us to observe the 10 unwholesome actions, and we must heed this very carefully, because you must understand the Buddha on the night of his enlightenment, when he was actually under the Bodhi tree, during the first 2 watches of the night, he actually developed the abhinya, the psychic power to see how beings are reborn, and have different fortunes and misfortunes due to the deeds that they have done, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. So from there, the Buddha actually knows, what deeds will lead to what consequences and what fruits. So we must actually take heed of what the Buddha said, that because he has actually seen this for himself, and he has actually highlighted, these 10 unwholesome actions time and time again in so many suttas, that this is unlikely to be something that is actually written by subsequent authors after the Pali Canon has been formalized after the first Buddhist Council. It's very unlikely, because this actually belongs to the very early Buddhism that the Buddha has taught from the Pali Canon, and we must definitely take heed of these 10 unwholesome actions very carefully. So next, I just again would just like to highlight to you the importance of actually observing our sila. Like I mentioned to you, in this Samyutta Nikaya 45.8, the Buddha actually explains what the Noble Eightfold Path is. And if you see the Noble Eightfold Path, 3 of the 8 factors actually comprise sila. The right speech, right action, and right livelihood. It's 3 out of 8. So we must make sure that we actually observe our sila well, to make sure that we are able to track the path, of the Noble Eightfold Path well. Otherwise, we find that we are forever, out of the Noble Eightfold Path. We haven't actually entered the path yet, And the Buddha actually says, what is right speech? Of course, the Buddha, this refers to, the 4 unwholesome actions, the lying, the malicious speech, and the harsh speech and the frivolous speech. And what is the right action? The Buddha says to abstain from taking life, stealing, and and sensual misconduct. And this is actually what we call the right action, right speech, right action, and of course right livelihood. And these are the Noble Eightfold Path. And again, in this Sutta AN 5.25, the Buddha again highlights how important virtue is. He says that this right view, which is the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, it is actually supported by these 5 things. Four things. First is actually what we call the virtuous behavior, the virtue. And right view is supported by learning, because you have to learn, actually what right view is. You must actually understand what the Buddha taught. Otherwise, you actually don't have a direction as to what right view is, and then you don't know what to practice, what not to practice. And you must actually discuss, with people who are knowledgeable, with the Sangha members, in terms of what actually right view is. And of course, these three, in terms of the virtue learning discussion, we're talking about the mundane right view. If you want to actually attain the supra-mundane right view, then you must actually go into meditation, which is actually to practice the samatha and vipassana, which is calm and the serenity and the insight meditation. And of course, once you have all these, then of course then the right view is being perfected. But the very first thing you must have is actually virtue. And that's where right view is actually supported by. These are like the supports for right view. If you don't have even the virtue, there's actually no right view to speak of. And of course, in this sutta, which records the conversation between the Buddha and his son, Venerable Rahula, recorded in MS61, you find that the Buddha actually advises Rahula that if anyone feels no shame in telling a lie, a deliberate lie, there's no evil, I tell you, that he will not do. So Rahula, you should train yourself that you will not tell a lie, even in jest. Even when you're trying to joke with someone, you should not even tell a lie. So the Buddha says that if you can't even observe your sila, and you actually have this propensity to tell lies, then you are actually far from the spiritual life. It's like the Buddha says, it's like water in a container that's actually thrown out. It's like you are throwing yourself. The entire holy life is actually completely thrown out, just like the water being thrown out, from the container. So again, the Buddha says that this virtue or sila is very important. And one more thing, in terms of this importance of sila, if you look at it from this AN 10.177, there is actually a very interesting conversation between Buddha and the Brahmin called Janu Sonin. And this Brahmin Janu Sonin, in this sutta, he actually, of course, in this sutta, he actually asked the Buddha, so if I actually make food offerings, will actually my departed relatives accept these food offerings or not, and of course, the Buddha tells him that, under right certain conditions, these food offerings will actually will benefit, your departed beings, your departed relatives, if they're reborn, as in the hungry ghost realm, the afflicted spirit realm, then because they're quite near us, they're able to actually rejoice, and they're also able to partake of the food, but of course, if you're reborn in for example, in the heavenly realms as a human being, of course, this will not be beneficial. But that is actually part of the discussion. But what I'm trying to actually highlight to you is, then this Janu Sonin actually went on to ask the Buddha. He says that what if someone actually does a lot of dana? He actually likes to do charity and generosity. He likes to support the Sangha, the ascetics, the Brahmins. But he does not actually observe his sila. He does a lot of unwholesome actions. He actually involved in killing living creatures, like to steal. Involved in sensual misconduct, like to actually involved in malicious speech. Like to divide people. Has wrong views, tell lies. And what happens if what will happen to this sort of people? Does a lot of charity dana, but then engages in a lot of unwholesome actions, does not observe his sila. Then the Buddha says, if that's the case, this person will be reborn in the company of the common animals, either as a horse, cattle, or dog. So, but even though they are reborn as common animals, they actually have got the luxury of food and a lot of luxury. They're being showered with a lot of material food and material care, and they are given nice bed, nice food, and when they are not well, they're brought to vets, very much like our pet dogs and pet cats, right? It means like they have got such luxurious lives, so if you think about it, perhaps these pet dogs and pet cats, so they've done a lot of dana, but they never actually look up, never guard their sila properly. They engage in this kind of action. So as a result, they still get a lot of this benefits of dana, in return, but unfortunately, they are reborn in the realms of the common animals, either as a royal elephant, as a royal horse, or maybe as a pet dog, pet cat, which is actually quite unfortunate, right? They could have guarded their sila, that at least they could actually be reborn in the heavenly realms. Then, of course, in this sutta in AN 8.54, again, we find this conversation with this layperson by the name of Diga Janu. And the Buddha actually tells him that if a person has got these four qualities, then he will be happy in this life and in lives to come, you know. And what are these four qualities? And again, the Buddha says that these qualities comprise of what? It's actually sila. Yeah, you know, he actually comprises the four things. It's actually being consummate in the virtue, in generosity, in discernment, and of course faith. You know, sada, sila, chaga, panya. So these are the four qualities, you know, that if you possess of this, then you'll be happy in this life and lives to come. So again, you know, the observance of the sila, you know, features prominently in this sutta as well. And of course, in this AN 4.52, the Buddha talks about, you know, the four streams of merits, you know, that a lay person can have. This four stream, you know, if you actually have got verified, you know, unwavering confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and on top of that, you actually got your virtues very assiduously, you know, and you know, it's flawless, unblemished virtue. Then you actually have got these four streams of merits. And in AN 5.175, the Buddha says that if you actually does not guard your sila properly, then the Buddha actually calls that you are actually a lay person who is an outcast lay person, you know, a chandala, an outcast. If you actually do, you call yourself Buddhist, but you actually don't observe your sila and you do, you know, commit all these unwholesome actions, the Buddha says that you are an outcast lay person. And of course, in other suttas, you know, the Buddha says like this, AN 4.62, if you are blameless in body, speech, and mind, that you actually have got this happiness of blamelessness, you know. The Buddha says there are four kinds, and one of these is actually, you know, the happiness of blamelessness, because you feel I haven't done anything wrong, you know, and you feel that when you reflect upon it, you feel that, oh, my sila has been so unblemished, you know, and so flawless. You sometimes feel that there is this joy that wells up in you, you know, that you feel so joy and happy and rapture, you know, and that itself can actually help you in the meditation, because when you're happy, you're able to get into samadhi very quickly, you know? But if you always feel remorse and very agitated, it's very difficult for you to enter samadhi. And if you don't have samadhi, you know, then you can't see the truth of reality. You can't see things as they really are. So, like I mentioned, you know, the Buddha also, in this AN 11.1, the Buddha says, hey, what's the whole purpose of observing sila? You know, I mean, why should I observe sila? Actually, the Buddha says that there is actually a purpose why you observe sila. It tells Venerable Ananda, because if you observe your sila, then you are free from remorse, you know, Ananda. You are free from remorse. And when we are free from remorse, this in turn leads to joy, you know, like I mentioned just now. And it leads to rapture. And once this rapture actually fizzles out, then you feel that serenity in you, you know. And once you're serene and calm, you feel that there's a pleasure, you know, that's actually present within you. And when you feel pleasure, you feel that you can enter samadhi, you know, very easily. And when your mind is actually composed, you know, in samadhi, you actually have the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, you know. Yeah, basically, you see, you know, you're able to see knowledge and vision of things as they really are. What we call the Yatta Buddha Dasana. You know, you're able to see the things and knowledge and things of vision as they really are. And once you see things as they really are, and then it leads to disenchantment. And when you have disenchantment, then you have dispassion. And when you have this dispassion, then it leads to knowledge and vision of release. You know, that you are liberated. You know, you're able to let go, and you don't grasp onto conditioned things, you know, that much. And once you have this knowledge and vision, the Yatta Buddha Yana Dasana, then you know, you find that, you know, then sooner or later, you know, you actually attain full enlightenment. So that's why the Buddha says that this virtue itself is the cornerstone, you know, is the very foundation of the spiritual path. Without virtue, I mean, there's no progress at all. I mean, you can't proceed anywhere, you know, without virtue. So, but again, you know, like I said, the Buddha says, do not just stop short at sila. You know, because if you actually just stop at sila, the Buddha says that you are just basically like a person that, for example, you actually want to build a house using, you know, wood, right? And when you want to build a house, of course, you want to look at the hardest part of a tree trunk, right? You know, which is the inner part of the tree trunk, which is the hardest. you wouldn't be looking for the twigs or the leaves or the branches or the bark or the soft wood, right? I mean, you want to be looking at the hard wood. So the Buddha says that if you just are contented with just observing sila, that you say, oh, I'm actually so well developed in my sila, and you just rest content, on that, you rest on your laurel, and you don't proceed from there. Then the Buddha says that you're just like the person who are taking the outer bark of a tree to actually make a wooden house or to make furniture. I mean, that itself is actually not stable, right? It's actually not the objective of this spiritual life. So that itself is actually set out in MN 30, what we call the simile of the hardwood. Hardwood means the hardest part of the tree trunk. And again, in this AN 5.176, the Buddha tells Anathapindika, one day Anathapindika went to see the Buddha with his 500 lay people, and they actually offered a lot of dana to the Sangha and the Buddha. And after that, the Buddha tells Anathapindika, he says, householder, you have provided the community of monks with a lot of robes, armed food, and medicine, for the sick. But you shouldn't just rest content with just doing dana alone. You should train yourself, that you must periodically enter into seclusion and rapture. That's how you should train yourself. So the Buddha says, don't just do dana only, but you must also make sure that you progress from there. You must practice your sila, and also must actually enter into rapture. Rapture means you must do introspection. Look at yourself, watch your mind. And from there, you be able to enter the rapture. Even though this sutta doesn't talk about sila, it is actually understood, that the Buddha says that you must also, observe your sila so that you can actually practice seclusion and rapture. So after having discussed all this, how important it is to guard your sila, then the next question is, how should you actually guard your sila to be impeccable? A lot of people say that, observing the 5 precepts is, or the 10 also actions, nowadays is so difficult, right? I mean, I do it whenever I can, but sometimes, they give the excuses that, my job needs me to actually break the precepts, or sometimes I need to entertain my clients, so I need to actually drink a bit of beer or intoxicants and all this. So how should you actually guard yourself so that your sila is impeccable? So let's see what the Buddha says about this. So the Buddha actually says in this Anguttara Nikaya AN 3.105, the Buddha says, if you want to actually guard your sila, right, first thing is that the Buddha says, if your mind is unprotected, meaning your mind, if it's unguarded, your bodily action is also unguarded, and your speech, your verbal action also unguarded, your mental action is also unguarded. So if your body, speech, and mind actions are unguarded, then your bodily speech and whatever that you do by body, speech, and mind will actually get soggy, right? Will get tainted and get blemished. They're unwholesome. So if your body, speech, and mind actions are actually unwholesome, then it will not lead to a good death. So it's like an unwholesome, unfavorable destiny awaits you. So if you look at this sutta, the implications are that if you want to guard your sila well, first of all, you must actually guard your mind, because everything originates from the mind, right? It comes from intention, or what we call the sankhara. You must actually guard your mind very carefully. Like what the Buddha says in Dhammapada 1, everything is mind. By mind is all made. If the mind is pure, everything that follows it is pure. If your mind is actually filthy, and impure, everything that comes up is unwholesome. So everything comes from mind. So for you to actually guard your sila well, you must actually watch your mind very carefully. And the same thing, is what the Buddha also tells Venerable Rahuda. It's like, when before you do any action, whether by body, speech, and mind, it's like where before, during, and after, you must actually reflect, whether this action will lead to the self-affliction of myself or others. If it leads to self-affliction, means it actually is not good. It leads to self-affliction to yourself and others. Then you must actually give it up. So what the Buddha says, you must always reflect the intention, before, during, and after, whether that action will lead to anything that's unwholesome, and will lead to anything that's that's not that afflicts you and others. So if you find that that's actually not good, then you should actually give it up. So what the Buddha says that you must actually have got sampajanya, not just a sati. Sati is like you just know, like, okay, I have this intention, I see something, I have this intention. That actually you're aware, you're just mindful, but you must have the sampajanya to reflect on that, whether you should actually act upon this intention or not. If it's something that will lead to the affliction of others or yourself, please give it up immediately. That's what the Buddha tells Venerable Rahula. So if you look at it, to guard your sila itself, you must actually start from the mind, the sankhara. Everything originates from the mind. In terms of your sankhara as well as your mental, your mind consciousness, which is what we call the mano vijnana. Whatever you see, whatever that comes to your six sense basis, you must make sure that you are aware of them. So that's why it's actually no surprise that the Buddha says, a person who is impeccable when it comes to not doing the 10 causes of unwholesome action is who? Is basically the stream enterer. It's a sotapanna. And why is it the Buddha says that the sotapanna is actually, that he's actually, impeccable? He actually observed the sila assiduously, because the Buddha says that sotapanna is actually able to know and see all phenomena, in terms of non-self, he's able to see. So which means he actually watches his mind all the time, and he actually contemplates all the phenomena, whether it is his five khandhas through the six sense doors, he actually watches his mind very carefully, and because of that, he's able to guard his virtue very conscientiously, and because he watches his mind and he guards his virtue, so that's why the Buddha says a sotapanna is incapable of doing any of the 10 unwholesome actions that will lead to rebirth in the 10 in the woeful realms, whether as in the hell, in the animal, or as in the world of the hungry shades. So that's why the stream winner, he's actually destined, he's actually destined, headed for self-awakening, and he's not able to be reborn in any of the 3 woeful realms, because he watches his mind all the time. And and he's able to watch the intention, and he's able to guard, so that he does not commit any of the 10 unwholesome actions. So, for us to be impeccable in our sila, we must actually practice such that we should try and strive so that we become a sotapanna, a stream enterer, at least in this very lifetime, to be worth our lives as human beings. And how do you actually practice to be a sotapanna? So we can see that from SM 22.122, the Buddha says, if a virtuous monk actually contemplates the 5 aggregates as non-self, and because our aggregates are non-self, and they are actually empty, and they're empty of a permanent and changing self, and they're always changing, and they're empty, and that is because all these phenomena of the Dhamma is actually they come about, or they are fabricated because of causes and conditions. So if you keep on contemplating these 5 khandhas in terms of not self, then the Buddha says that it is possible, that a virtuous monk attending, in an appropriate way to these 5 aggregates and not self, he will be able to realize the stream entry. So the Buddha says, contemplating the 5 aggregates is so important. And when how do you contemplate the 5 aggregates? The Buddha says that you must actually make sure that you will actually remain in the present moment at all times. And how do you remain in the present moment? You must maintain your sati, you anchor your sati in the 6 sense basis. Your eye, your nose, your ears, your tongue, your body, and also the mind. Must make sure that you always anchor yourself in the 6 sense basis, and be aware of all the internal, the external, sense basis that come to you, and you must also be aware how your mind is reacting to this phenomena, these 6 sense, external 6 sense objects that come to your mind. So if you actually look at this in this way, then the Buddha says, if you look at it in terms of how your 5 khandhas originate and cease through the 6 sense doors, then in a way, you are actually practicing the way to attain the stream entry, and how should you actually practice, in this way? I mean, let me give you an example. For example, if you actually see, or perhaps if you hear someone actually say something unpleasant about you, and of course, first of all, you are aware, that something has spoken to you, spoken about you, through your ear and also the sound. Then you'll find that you react negatively to to whatever that's being said about you, something negative, and you feel that, that you feel very unhappy, a sense of resentment arises in you. And you know that, okay, I know that, this dosa has risen in me, which is actually a kilesa, so you actually watches your mind, if the chitta, you watch your chitta. So because you know that this anger has risen in you, then you actually investigate, how does this chitta come about? Oh, how does this anger come about? This resentment. Oh, this resentment, it comes about, because of my thought, I think, because of the thought that, I actually thought about, how could this person actually say something, so negative about me, and how does this thought come about? Then maybe you investigate and say, oh, because it's due to perception that, that this is a criticism, that's being said about me. And this perception itself, arises, because of contact, and how does that contact come about? Oh, because of ear consciousness. And how does this ear consciousness come about? Oh, because it's actually because of the ear on contact with the sound of somebody criticizing me. So if you look at this, then you actually find that this anger that arises in you, the resentment, actually, it is not a self, it doesn't have a permanent unchanging self, but because it actually arises because of causes and conditions. If you look at it in terms of this change of conditionality, we find that actually this anger, it actually arises because of causes and conditions. And because of this, it doesn't have a self. And because of this, it's subject to change, it's subject to disillusion. And because of that, you become disenchanted, and after a while, you reflect upon it, you tend to let go and not cling to the anger anymore. So, which in fact is what the Buddha, what I just described to you in terms of how it should be, what one should contemplate, is actually captured also under this sutta called MN 146, where it is where this venerable Nandaka actually gave discourse to the bhikkhunis. He actually taught the bhikkhunis exactly how to contemplate such that to attain the fruits of the liberation. So what Venerable Nandaka says is that he actually asked the bhikkhunis to just reflect that how does this fire come about? And you light a candle, right? Of course you get light. Light comes out from the fire. So he asked the bhikkhunis to contemplate, how does this light come about? This light comes about because of the fire that's been lighted. And how does this fire come about? How does this fire come about? Oh, this fire come about because of the candle, or the oil lamp, oil lamp as well as the wick, and of course there's air. It's on account of these supporting factors. That's how the light comes about. So can you actually say that this light actually has got a self? Means that this light, it doesn't depend on causes and conditions. It's just there by itself. It has got a permanent unchanging self. Then it's not actually doesn't depend on any factors at all. It's just there by itself. It is simply impossible, right? It's just not logical, for you to say that something can exist by himself and with no causes and conditions, right? So if you say that something has a self, it's not logical at all. So when you contemplate upon it, the light itself is actually non-self, and it is actually conditionally arisen, and dependent on causes and conditions. So once the oil lamp actually, is used up, or the wick is exhausted, or there's no air, the fire actually is extinguished. And when the fire is extinguished, the light actually goes out. So you see that the light itself is non-self. So you shouldn't actually cling on to the light, because it's actually non-self. And the same thing that the Venerable Nandaka says, that if you see a shadow that's actually being formed because of the sun and the tree, you see that this shadow is formed because of the sun, the light, and also the tree. Can you actually say that the shadow has got a self? Means that the shadow, if it's formed by itself, that means it's not dependent on anything. It's just there. It doesn't depend on any causes and conditions. It's simply illogical because this shadow is formed by the sunlight and the tree, and so if the sun actually disappears, or or the tree is actually being removed, this shadow automatically disappears, right? So that's why you say this shadow is actually non-self. It's actually, causally, conditionally reason, and it's actually non-self. So that's why you can never say that it's actually got self, is non-self. So if you contemplate upon it, then eventually you actually go disenchanted like that. Everything is basically just non-self. And once you realize non-self, you also know that it is also impermanent, because how can anything that's dependent on conditions to be permanent, right? Just like the light, once the oil is out, basically, everything also disappears. It's also impermanent. And anything that's impermanent, of course, is unsatisfactory, is dukkha also, right? I mean, can you really hope for the light to be there forever? No, I mean, it's dependent on conditions. If there's oil, there's wick, there's light, there's fire, there's light. If there's no condition, then this light also disappears, or the shadow also disappears. So it is actually not satisfactory. It's dukkha, it's impermanent. And because all this happens because it's non-self. So that's why the Buddha in the sutta actually tells us that we must continually practice this, so that we become a sotapanna. And once you're a sotapanna, then of course, then you become very you watch your mind all the time, and you become impeccable in the observing of your sila. So in a nutshell, based on what I just told you this morning, based on the sutta, we all know that we must at the very least practice the 5 precepts, observe the 5 precepts, and on top of that, on Uposatha days, as lay people, we should try to observe the 8 precepts as far as we can. Even though we are not in monasteries, we can still observe 8 precepts at home. And on top of that, the Buddha emphasized to us, do not commit and refrain from the 10 unwholesome actions, because if you do that, you're creating the potential to fall into all the woeful planes, and you can never, you disqualify as a human being, or even in the heavenly realms. And on top of that, like I mentioned to you, to guard your sila impeccably, you must make sure that you watch your mind. Like the Dhammapada, this one, everything is mind. By mind is all made. So you must make sure you watch your mind very carefully. And you should try to practice, so that you become a stream enterer. Because a stream enterer is someone who actually watches his mind, all the time. He is able to look at, all the phenomena as non-self, and he watches his intention also whenever he does anything. That's why he's incapable of doing anything that's unwholesome. And because of that, he doesn't fall into any of the woeful planes, and he only has got maximum 7 lives before he attains enlightenment. So he's actually said to be destined for enlightenment. So, and like I mentioned to you, for you to practice, you must make sure you must always be in the present moment. Anchor your sati on the 6th sense basis. Always be careful, be aware of what comes into contact with your 6th sense basis, and how you react to it. And whether any kilesas, in terms of lobha, dosa, moha, actually arise in your mind. In terms of doing the citta nupassana, always beware. And then again, you must also practice yoniso manasikara, which is sampajanya. Look at how this lobha, dosa, moha arise, in terms of the chain of conditionality. Basically from how they arise, to the internal, external sense objects. Then from there, you see that actually everything is non-self. And then from there, once you know that everything is non-self, then you find that actually it's actually not worth clinging onto it. Then you become very disenchanted, and you've also become very dispassionate and disenchanted. Then that's where the letting go starts to happen. It's by practicing this, sati sampajanya. So that's how you actually develop along the path of the liberation taught by the Blessed One. So with this, I've actually come to the end of my talk. I now open to the floor for any questions that you may have on today's topic on the observance of the precepts, and how to be impeccable in actually observing our precepts. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Ghatikara. So brothers and sisters, if you have any questions, please put it into the chat box. For those who are joining us from Facebook or YouTube, you can also post your questions, and then our Zoom administrator will actually repost in our Zoom chat. So we have a first question here, Brother Loo.
Yes.
Thank you for your very comprehensive and in-depth discussion. Please help to explain further what is self-radiant Deva realm.
Okay, the self-radiant Deva realms are basically called the Abhasara Devas. They actually they belong to the Brahma realm. So it's basically a realm where the Brahma beings reside. So that's why the Buddha says if you practice the 8 precepts, and on top of that you actually do dana, support your parents, practice and keep your sila well, then you develop the potential to be reborn with among the devas of the self-radiant beings, what we call the Abhasara Devas. They're actually a realm in the Brahma world. So if you want to get more information about this Abhasara, I think in the suttas, if you go to access to insight, there are many suttas there are a few suttas that actually talk about these beings and how one can actually be reborn in the Abhasara Devas, known as the self-radiant beings.
Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. Brothers and sisters, do you have any other questions? Please feel free to type into our chat box. Okay, there's another question, Brother Ghatikara.
Yes.
AN 3.7, can you briefly share how can we do the 5 contemplation in Uposatha day after observing the sila?
Okay, basically the Buddha taught about the contemplations of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, your generosity, and your sila, and the devas. In terms of these 6 contemplations, the Buddha actually taught this to the lay people. Now, if you find that during the Buddha's time, the Buddha never taught about the contemplation of non-self to the lay people. And this is mainly taught to the monastics. Of course, with one exception, it was actually taught to Anathapindika on his deathbed. If you actually look at MN, I think 145, I think, this Venerable Sariputta actually taught he actually taught Anathapindika on how to contemplate oneself. Most of the time, the Buddha and the monastics actually teach the lay people how to contemplate. Bring your mind to the contemplation. So essentially, what you do is that it's actually a form of contemplation. Means you try to recollect, bring to your mind. It's a form of sati. It's a form of recollection to remember. The qualities of the Buddha. You can actually, for example, the Buddha. You can actually recite the Itipiso Bhagava Arahant. You can think about the Buddha is an Arahant. He's actually eradicated. All the kilesas, all the lobha dosa moha, and he's actually overcome, and he's all the defilements, all the fetters, and the Arahant, then Samasa Buddha, he's perfectly self-awakened, Vijja Charana Sampano, he's actually perfect, his wisdom and knowledge and his conduct, is actually impeccable, unblemished. So, you actually think about all this, about the qualities of the Buddha. Then after that, then next you move on to, for example, like you think about the qualities of the Dhamma, then you think about, Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, it's actually well expounded by the Blessed One, Sandidiko Akaliko, it's like, it's actually in the present, what you see, what you actually see in the present. Like, for example, you see, Lobha Dosa Moha arise in you. It's like, this is the very Dhamma the Buddha talks about. You see the defilements arise in you. That's immediate, Sandidiko, Akaliko. It's immediate, and you see it for yourself, and this is like Sandidiko means you see it for yourself, that, there's Lobha Dosa Moha in you, and it is actually immediate. Ehi Pasiko means the Buddha says that you must investigate why this Lobha Dosa Moha arise in me, why do I get angry, what's the cause of it, Is it because of craving? Is it because of something else? And you actually look at it in terms of the conditionality and try to see that actually is non-self. Opanyayiko is actually leading inwards, looking at your mind. So you actually contemplate the wonderful qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and then you then reflect, okay, for generosity, you reflect, okay, I have actually been generous, on many fronts. I support the Sangha, and I support the requisites needed by the Sangha. And on top of that, I also support my parents, and I also help my friends, So when you think about, and also you help charities, whenever there's any charitable organizations that you need funding, then you find that, I'm being generous myself, and you feel that there's a happiness that comes within you, and the same goes for sila. You actually contemplate, I've been following my precepts very well. So if you reflect upon that, it gives you a sense of joy and happiness within you, and that itself is actually something very special, So, and also, of course, you contemplate the devas, that, the devas, they're there because they have also practiced the same way as what I have. It also gives you a sense of joy. So this is a kind of a recollection practice, bringing your mind, or bringing your mind to the qualities, of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and also what you have done. So it actually serves to calm yourself. It's a sort of a samatha practice. It actually calms and makes your mind very serene. And you find that you're able to enter the samadhi very quickly. And if you with that base, if you actually go into sampajanya and look at do insight meditation, by doing vipassana, you find that you'll be able to progress much better than if someone who doesn't have samadhi.
Okay, thank you. I think we will take one final question for this morning session. It says,
Sure.
Brother Loo, the Uposatha method observed by the the Uposatha method observed by the Theravada and Mahayana lay followers, is it the same? When observing Uposatha, can one see TV news or read news via handphone for daily update on what is happening around? I think there are two questions.
Yeah, the ways of the Uposatha for Theravada. I mean, I'm no expert in Mahayana, but I believe that the ways of the observing will be there will be slight variances, but it's best to consult those who are in the Mahayana tradition to be really sure, because I'm very much into early Buddhism, so I'm not in the position to comment, in terms of how different they are in terms of Mahayana, because I think Mahayana also there are different schools and different ways of practice, so it's difficult to generalize as well. But what I can safely say is actually based on the Pali Canon, the Buddha actually has set out the eight-factored observance, which we must practice. To your second part of the question, in terms of whether it's okay to watch news and TV, well, I mean, watching TV itself, would actually not in accordance with the seventh precept of, to refrain from watching any entertainment. Even though you may say news, but even though you may say news, there will be other elements on TV, which will be entertainment. So to make sure that you are pristine in your Uposatha observance, I would advise that watching TV should be disallowed, and you should also try not to read news, but you should actually try to the principle of observing the eight Uposatha is actually to try to cleanse, your default mind, to purify your default mind, and so that you can actually try not to be distracted by sensual pleasures, and devote your attention to the practice of the Dhamma, and I think that would be the safest way to practice. So I would say watching TV should not be allowed, or even watching news. It's best that you focus yourself on the practice of the Dhamma.
Okay. I think that's all the time we have for this Sunday. Thank you very much, Brother Ghatikara.
Thank you, Brother Danny, for the opportunity.
Yeah, for the wonderful Dhamma sharing, and also to all brothers and sisters for all your questions and participations. So before we end our session, let us do the dedication and sharing of merits. Okay, can you please refer to the slides? Can you see the slides? Let us recite and reflect on it together. Dedication and sharing of merits. Idam me nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang no nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang wo nyatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Eta wata cha amhehi sampatang punya sampadang sabe sata anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Let us make our aspiration. Idame punyang asawa kaya wahang hotu. Idame punyang nibanasa pacayo hotu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.